Like Austin said, I'm local here in South Dakota. A few years ago, my wife and I started raising composting worms and taking the compost from those and putting them into our garden. And we had really good results, and we had an opportunity to move to the Rapid City Farmers Market, so we did that and have expanded our garden every year since then. We don't put any chemicals in our garden. I raise composting worms, and the compost and the castings that they create is the only thing we put in our garden. I don't use any pesticides, fertilizers, any chemicals whatsoever. And we also make compost tea from the worm castings and run that through our drip irrigation or foliar spray it on our plants. And that's pretty much everything that goes into our garden, and we've had really good luck with it. So, a little introduction. Vermicomposting can remove significant waste from our landfills in a fraction of the time of regular composting methods. Worms can eat a tremendous amount of food waste every day. They can eat, in ideal conditions, they can eat their body weight in food almost every single day. So a much faster method of composting than your traditional methods. The sustainability factor of it is you can turn waste into high-value soil amendments that allow more productive pest-resistant gardens. We haven't really had too many issues with pests. The issues that I do have, I hit them with diatomaceous earth. We've had a few potato bugs. Trying to think of what we had. And other than that, not a whole lot of issues with pests. We've got grasshoppers all the way around our garden, but I don't usually see too many of them in our garden. The plants are strong enough that they don't bother them too much. They'll go after a weaker plant if we have something that's sick or something from the start, but for the most part, we don't have too many problems. Worms will eat pretty much anything except for meat and dairy. They love cardboard, any kind of food waste. Not hard to feed worms. They eat almost everything that most people throw out. I've got 4x8 compost bins that I've got outside and inside, and I can fill one of those with solid worm castings in 6 to 9 months, depending on conditions. I use a lot of horse manure in my bins, and worms love that. They go through it really fast and just turn it into solid worm castings in a short amount of time. Worms love cardboard, I already said that. So all of our Amazon boxes go into our bins. Doesn't take them long to go through those and eat a cardboard box. The easiest way to explain the distinction between worm castings and fertilizer is that fertilizer feeds plants, but worm castings feed the soil. What I mean by that is worm castings contain all of the microbes and bacteria and things that are naturally found in the soil, and they help to create, they repopulate the soil with all of that life. And within that life, the microbes and the bacteria, when some of those die and go through their natural processes, they release fertilizers into the soil. And plants will absorb those, and then that's what creates the cycle. And you don't need to apply fertilizers when you've got healthy soil and you've got all the life in your soil. And then the next question that everybody asks me is, does it work? That's our garden, and that's my lovely wife standing back there in the middle of the tomato plants. All of our plants are a super nice dark green color like that. Hardly have any issues with our plants, and we've had really, really good success with the methods that we're using. And production is, I would say, just as good or maybe even better than conventional fertilizer applications. Bedding for worms. Like I said, I use a lot of manures. Horse, cow, sheep, rabbit, all are excellent bedding sources for rabbits or for worms. They love all of that manure. If you want to raise them more indoors and have less smells, I guess you'd say, and there's not really a lot of odor with it, but peat moss and cocoa coir can be used indoors. A lot of people have the little worm bins and want to have them in their house or in their garage or whatever, so those are excellent options for that. And you shouldn't notice any odors from your worm bins. If you notice odors, then you're overfeeding or overwatering, something along those lines, and it's went anaerobic. Moisture should be about 50 to 70%. Like with peat moss, you should be able to squeeze a handful of it and only get just a couple of drops out of that handful. That's about ideal for moisture. Temperature, pretty wide variety of temperatures. 70 to 80 is ideal. Worms can take it almost down to freezing, the red wigglers anyway, and they can withstand temperatures probably up to about 95. So pretty good variety of temperatures for our area. When I feed my bins, I usually try to feed them in one area and don't cover the whole bin. That way, if that material heats up, the worms have someplace else to go to get away from it. And you want to use a well-drained container. I use a lot of plastic bins, and I drill holes in the bottom of them. Or my 4x8 bins. I don't have a picture of one of those, I guess, but I buy the waste management dumpster totes off Amazon. They're about $30 for a 4x8 bin, and then I build a wood frame around that to hold it up, and then I just start filling it up. And it's got the nylon mesh on it that'll drain water out of it nicely, so it works really good for that. Worm breeding. Worms are hermaphrodites, meaning when they mate, each worm produces a cocoon or an egg after they mate. Each worm will lay about 1 cocoon per week, and each cocoon can contain between 1 and 4 baby worms, so they reproduce really fast. If you put 500 worms into a small bin and leave them in there for 3 weeks, which is the gestation cycle for them, you should have somewhere in the ballpark of 1,500 cocoons at the end of those 3 weeks, and maybe 2 or 3 average worms per cocoon. So under the right conditions, they can reproduce really fast, and you can grow your herd really quickly. If they get too crowded in a bin, they sense that, and they'll stop breeding. They'll slow down and stop breeding. So just, and I don't know if I've ran into that. I mean, you have to have a lot of worms in a bin to get them to stop breeding completely. The benefits of worm castings are all of these. It can increase your product yield. It can accelerate plant growth. I've seen pictures of plant starts that are treated with or not treated, but have 20% of worm castings added to them, and they're much bigger than typical plant starts with potting soil and fertilizer. Nutrient content is easily absorbed by plants. Everything they need is already in the soil, so it's already there around the root system. A fertilizer enriched by bacteria. The life cycle of everything that's in your soil creates all the nutrients and the fertilizer that your plants need. Makes plants healthier. They're a stronger plant. They're more pest resistant. Just overall healthier plants. You get better root system from them with all of the nutrients in the soil there that they need. Water retention of your soil. When you have better soil, it becomes, as most of you probably know, it becomes a lot more spongy, and it'll absorb and hold water better with all the right life in it. Rich in microorganisms. Germination and growth increases, productivity increases, and root benefits. Said that already, I guess. Like I said, worm castings create life. You're adding all of those living things to your soil, and everything that your soil needs naturally, you're replenishing all of that and adding to it. A lot of you I'm sure, are familiar with the soil food web. It's the very beginning of the food chain with life in your soil. It's a living, breathing superorganism filled with microscopic and macroscopic beings, all work to turn death's remains back to life. The same organisms are what populate the worm bins, work in cooperation with worms to break down food scraps and other organic debris. You might not be able to see them, but there's millions or billions of microorganisms in your soil eating waste products that are in the soil. like I said, sustainable without synthetic fertilizer. I don't use any chemicals in mine. Saves water. Dirt becomes soil and retains water much better when it's healthy. Some more benefits. Boy, I'm really hitting on the synthetic fertilizer thing. Most of you probably know chemical fertilizers are high in salts, which harms your soil biology. You know, salt kills anything it touches if there's too much salt, and that's kind of the effect that chemical fertilizers have on soil. Using chemicals to provide plants with the nutrients they require sets them up to become chemically dependent. They take up nitrogen and other nutrients with ease, no longer needing biology to cycle nutrients. And many of you know if you put fertilizer on your lawn, you know, like the services that do that, your lawn, you know, next couple of days it's super green, you know, looks super good, and a month later when those fertilizers are gone, you know, your lawn runs out of food, so it starts to turn brown or go dormant or whatever, and needs another shot of fertilizer. So you become dependent on the synthetic fertilizers and need to keep reapplying them over and over. With healthy soil, you don't need to do that. You've got a sustainable life in your soil, and you don't have to apply fertilizers over and over. The black gold you dig out of your worm bin is loaded with all kinds of organisms that are itching to find a home near a plant and garden to help it live a long and fruitful life. Chitin is one of the benefits of worm castings. It's the most abundant polysaccharide in nature. Its presence around plants triggers a defense to think that they're being attacked by an insect. Makes plants stronger by thickening the cell walls. Worms naturally produce a certain amount of chitin, and that's what triggers your plants into being healthier and less pest resistant. They just become a stronger plant, and pests usually just avoid them because they'll attack a weaker plant rather than a strong one. Applications of compost worm castings. They can be applied directly to soil or made into a tea. If you use worm castings, I typically put 1/8 of a cup to 1/4 of a cup per plant in each hole when you plant them. You also mix it. I also mix it in with my potting soil to start plants, and I make a lot of aerated tea that helps to multiply all of your microbes that are in your soil. And then you can spread it over a larger area. It's easier to apply. When you spray the dense microbe aerated tea, the microbes form a film, almost like a glue that'll stick to the leaves of a plant. And a lot of people call that a film or whatever on there. When you spray it on the plants, the microbes attach to the leaf and outcompete the harmful disease-causing microbes like black rot, mildew, early blight, and also become food for the leaf. So it's absorbed through the plant leaves. Root watering and foliar sprays are effective for nutrition of plants and pest resistance. I've had tremendous success using worm tea and spraying it both on the leaves and root watering it. Unlike synthetic fertilizers, you can't overuse it. You can put 5 gallons on a plant and it won't hurt the plant. You know, that's way more than you need, obviously, but it's not going to burn your plants like a synthetic fertilizer will. You're just adding more microbial life and more water to that plant if you overuse it. And I tend to overuse it on my garden. I water heavy with it. The forms of worm composting is you can use a bin system, which is the easiest, simplest to start. You can use a simple storage tote like this. Put some manure or peat moss in it and add some worms to it, get your moisture right, and feed them once a week as needed. A lot of people start out this way, and then you can start splitting your bins. Like I mentioned before, 3 weeks is the cycle for worms to reproduce, the gestational cycle. So if you really want to grow your colony, you can split your bins every 3 weeks. Get a 1/8-inch screen and separate your worms out from the compost, and move the worms into a new bin, and then you'll have all of the cocoons in the old bin, and they'll hatch out and do just fine in there. You can also do a tray system. This is probably the most effective way to breed worms and increase your numbers. It's also the highest maintenance. The more bins you got, the more time it takes to take care of all of them, to feed and water each one of them, probably 3-4 times a week, depending on your conditions. They're great if you want to sell worms. It's not the best method for creating the most compost and most castings. But if you want to sell worms to people, that's probably the most efficient way to go and most productive. There's a wedge system. This is a picture from the Arizona worm farm. I was just down there last week and went on a tour there. They had a conference about worm farming, and that was amazing. So they build a wedge like this up against plywood sheets, and they feed the front edge of the wedge and just keep stringing it out until it gets out to where they run out of room. They've got wedges about every, 20 feet apart or something like that. And when they run out, they just pull the plywood out of the back of it, and the back side of that is pure worm castings, because the worms have gone through that material and then they've moved on because they keep feeding them out to the edge of it. And I don't know how many rows that they have there. They've got quite a few, 15 rows, something like that. They produce a tremendous amount of worms and worm castings there. Really a phenomenal facility. They've got a whole garden, greenhouses, fruit trees, chickens. It's a whole ecosystem that they feed with their worms. So it's everything lives off the worms there. I kind of mentioned how the wedge system works. Highly effective for them to produce a lot of worm castings and compost there. I'm going through this really fast. Hopefully there's a lot of questions afterwards. Summary is anybody can raise worms. They're really not hard to raise. Temperature and humidity is your main thing to watch with them. If you've got those two things under control, your worms will thrive. Like I said, the worm castings are highly effective for your garden. And if your bin is well cared for, there won't be any smell to it. It'll have an earthy odor like good potting soil. Everybody asks me, they must smell, but if your worm bins are healthy, there's no odor to them at all. Kids love worms. They're a great educational tool for kids to get them involved in gardening and general education about plant life and soil health. There's a picture of a glob of worms happy in their bin. And this is what worm castings should look like when they're screened out of the bin. These have been through like an 1/8 inch screen and filtered out all the big material in a bin that hasn't been composted yet. It's a really fine black soil. Like I said, no smell to it, and really easy to work with, really easy to handle. You can run them through like a spreader if you want to apply them to topsoil, or put them in a worm tea is probably the most effective way to fertilize a large area with them. Anybody have any questions? Yeah.
What are you using for like the actual median when you're starting off making your composting bin?
Either compost that you've already got. I use a lot of manures, horse manure or cow manure, sheep manure, anything you can get hold of. If you can't get hold of any of those things, peat moss or cocoa coir works really well also.
Where do you keep your bins?
In the summer, I have them outside, and in the wintertime, I move them into the garage so that they can stay above freezing.
So they do have to, and I know you said that, you've got to keep them above freezing?
Yeah. And if you're using fresh manure, you potentially can keep them outside and put a seed heat mat on top of them and insulate your bin a little bit, put a blanket on it or insulation around it. There are people that do that commercially and are able to get their worms to survive in the wintertime by using hot compost. But I move most of mine indoors to be safe.
What type of worms are these?
I mainly have red wigglers. There's three main types of composting worms. There's a red wiggler, which is kind of the gold standard. There's a European nightcrawler that's a little bit bigger, also very hardy, will withstand a pretty wide variety of temperatures. And then there's an African nightcrawler. The African nightcrawler is the biggest worm and probably goes through the most compost, but it's the it's the least excuse me the least temperature tolerant. They're a tropical worm, and they probably won't survive down below 50 or so. So not too many people have those up here in the northern part of the country.
Is there any concern with weeds or anything in the manure you're using, like from cows or any of that?
I haven't had any problems with it. I leave it in the bin for quite a while. It's in there for at least 6 months, maybe 9 months, and I haven't had a lot of issues with that I've noticed. I do have raised beds, and I cover them with plastic, but not that I've noticed too much. If you pre-composted all your manure and had that go through a hot cycle, you would eliminate all your weeds out of it. And a lot of people recommend that just to get rid of your weeds, but I haven't had too many issues with it. Yeah.
How long do you do the aeration? When
For
you're
the
making-
teas?
Yes.
It depends on temperature a lot. If it's, I don't remember what they say. If it's 50, 60 degrees out, something like that, kind of a cooler day, they recommend 48 hours. Warmer day, like 80 or 90 degrees, I think they only go 24 hours. So that's kind of what I stick with. I don't usually go more than 48 hours. I don't think there's any benefit to going longer than that, or probably less than 24.
Can you explain your process of getting the castings out of the bin and how often you do it and
Sure.
how much it
Sure.
yields?
Yeah, I generally let my bins fill up to the top. And then I've got an 1/8-inch screen. I've actually got a screening machine that I bought. And I'll just go through and run the castings through the screen, and that'll separate out the castings and the worms. And then the worms, of course, can go in a new bin, and your screener will, castings will go through your screen. So it's a lot of screening that I do. If you're putting it in your garden and you don't necessarily worry about the worms, you can just put it straight into your garden, worms and all. The worms probably won't make it through the winter up here, but they'll live in your garden all summer long and thrive in your garden until it freezes. Yeah.
Tell us how you make your tea.
How I make my tea. So I have just a 30-gallon trash barrel, and I put a spigot on the bottom of it. There's a lot of tea brewers out there that people can buy. You can buy the cylindrical cone tanks. Those are probably the best method. And I'll put in, for 30 gallons, I'll put in like 3 gallons of worm castings. I mix it pretty strong. You might not need that many in there, but I mix mine pretty strong. And then you can also add some other organic fertilizers. I'll usually put in a little bit of humic acid, some fish hydrolysate, and maybe some seaweed fertilizer. Mix those all together really well and put a really strong air pump on it for at least 24 hours, 48 hours maybe if it's cooler. And there you have it. And then you can either put your castings in a screen bag to keep them out of the liquid, or what I do is I'll take my castings and put them in a 5-gallon bucket and have like a paint mixer, and I'll mix them up really, really well and screen that off and put it in my barrel before I add the other fertilizers and put air to it. Either way, you'll want to, and if you're just putting it in a watering can, it doesn't matter. You could just dump your castings in there and they'll go through your watering can. But I usually run mine through like a garden sprayer, so I screen everything out so it'll run through there and not plug it up.
Are there worms that will survive up in this country that would be good for this? I mean, can we have the best of both worlds?
Probably the red wigglers, but then again, they won't take below freezing.
Oh, we have worms that do.
We have earthworms that'll burrow down. Yeah.
These
yeah.
won't burrow down?
No, composting worms generally stay at the top of the pile, and they don't burrow through soil like a typical earthworm does. So they can't dig down deep enough to survive the winters.
Well, so there are night crawlers that will burrow down. Will they work for composting?
They will, but they're a different type of worm. The night crawlers that we have will burrow in the soil, and they get a lot of their food from the soil when they burrow through it. Composting worm is dependent on food at the top of the soil, decaying leaves or organic matter that they eat.
Well, do your worms reproduce?
Oh yeah,
So, hypothetical situation here, if I had a bunch of night crawlers that would burrow, I could harvest some of them and turn them loose on my land, and then they would go down, and then the others could continue to compost and raise another crop of calves?
yeah, yep,
Okay,
yep.
thank you.
I don't think I really need this, but I had a worm bin, and I was told, I used kitchen, like potato peels and
yep.
all of that, and I was told you have to grind it all up.
You can. The smaller it is, the easier it is for the worms to eat. If you grind it up and you have it into tiny little pieces through a blender or something like that, worms can grab those tiny little pieces then and eat them quicker and easier for them. If you put a whole potato peel in there, they'll still eat it. It'll just take them longer for it to break down and for them to eat it.
So the humans are lucky to get that kind of treatment at my house.
Yeah, yeah.
Back to the worm juice, can you use chlorinated water when?
No, I didn't mention that. You want to dechlorinate your water, put it in a bucket, let it sit for a while, or even put your air pump on it and let the air pump run through it for a while so that you get the chlorine out of it best you can. Yeah, definitely don't want chlorinated water.
Two-part question, kinda. With your Amazon boxes, do you shred them before you put them in the?
I don't, but you certainly can.
Yeah.
They'll break down faster if you shred them.
Yeah, I suppose newspapers or paper products of any type.
Yeah,
would work well.
yeah. Anything you break down in your worm bin to smaller pieces is gonna process quicker.
Yep.
It's more accessible to the worms. They can go through it quicker.
And do you do anything with an extract versus the tea?
I do both.
Okay, so do you just use a mesh and then just shake it like in a 5-gallon bucket?
Yeah,
some
yep.
unchlorinated
I'll make
blood?
an extract that only has worm castings in it. So it's just worm castings and water. Put it in the bucket with my paint mixer and then screen off the bigger pieces. That doesn't have any food in it for all your microbes. So you're just getting the microbes that are in your worm castings. And by not feeding them, you're not going to have a bacterial bloom in there, and then it's going to crash and it's going to go anaerobic later on. So when you make your tea and you feed it with humic acid and hydrolysate and things like that, you're providing food for all the organisms that are in there. And so those organisms are only going to live as long as they've got food. So when you take that tea and you put it in a bottle and you cut off the oxygen from it in a bottle, it's only going to be good for a few hours before things start to die off because they run out of oxygen. So if you do a tea, you need to use it immediately. And I tell people if you can, right away, within 4 hours. An extract will last longer because you're not feeding it, and it'll probably have a shelf life of a couple of weeks.
So just thinking about me and kind of being lazy when I go home with this, could I pretty much, if I get 2 or 3 bins going, get a big trash can full of water by my garden and just throw a couple of shovels worth of the casting into it and grab water from that as I need it to water the garden?
You can. That would be an extract that you're making. If you mix it up, you'll get a lot of that life that's in the worm castings out into the water, get it away from the particles in there. But yeah, absolutely, you could fill up a water can or whatever and put it straight on your plants, yeah.
So I'm thinking about how do you store if you don't have a heated garage and things like that, and then what time frame? You said 6 to 9 months to really make this cycle go well.
Yeah, that's for a really large bin though.
Okay.
If you're using a smaller bin or like those totes, you can probably fill one of them up in 3 months.
Okay.
If you've got adequate number of worms in there. For storing them, if you screen castings out and put those in a bin, They'll probably store for quite a while, 6 months, something like that, and retain most of the life that's in them. There's still going to be worms in those because when you screen them, you can't get all of the cocoons out of there. So when you screen your castings off and put them in a bin, I always put a little bit of food in there. I'll use like chicken layer feed, works really well for them. I'll sprinkle a little bit of that in there, or if I've got some food scraps, I'll throw it in with my castings. Because the cocoons that are in there are going to hatch out, and then you're going to end up with more worms in your screened castings. And then that's going to sustain the life in there. You're going to have worms that are still going through it and feeding on stuff that's in there. So castings will last quite a while after you screen them. They can. Everything that's in them will go dormant, just like soil will. So my outdoor bins, of course, they'll freeze in the wintertime, and then in the spring, I'll take them and put them back on the garden. I usually try to put some worms in them early in the spring when they thaw out, just to get some more activity going in them. And then I'll screen the worms out and put them all in the garden. But yeah, all the life that's in them will go dormant over the winter and come back in the spring.
How do you put some extract or tea in furrow, like when you're planting your garden?
I do both. I'll soil drench with it, like with a watering can or something like that. And then I have drip irrigation all over my garden, so I'll run it through that. I'll screen it so it doesn't plug up my hoses, and I'll run it through my drip irrigation. And then I also put it in a sprayer and foliar spray all my plants too.
So then do you mulch? Do you till your garden, or is it no-till?
It's no-till, yeah.
Okay, so can you tell us about your composting method to combat weeds and to feed the soil?
Composting, if in an ideal world, you would pre-compost all your materials and get it to run through a heat cycle. And then after it runs through a heat cycle and kills off all of your weed seeds and stuff in there, the bad stuff, then you would turn around and put that in your worm compost bin and feed it to your worms. So that's an ideal situation.
What do you use for mulch on the garden to combat?
Just what's in my compost bins.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, there'll be a lot of material in there that's not processed, along with a lot of worm castings. I don't know what they end up, but when I end up with a whole bin, it's probably 50-50 maybe of material that still needs to be processed and worm castings. So I'll just put that straight on my plants.
How often do you do the foliar?
I try to do tea every couple of weeks at a minimum. If I can, I try to do it once a week. And I don't know if you would have to apply it that often or not. I would say once a month probably would be adequate. But because I've got plenty of castings, I put it on more often.
So the garden that you're putting your castings on, is that your own personal garden, or can you put it on a market garden without the government saying, oh, you can't do that?
We do a market garden. We sell our produce at the farmer's market. So I'm not aware of any. I'm not aware of any restrictions as far as using castings. They're basically an organic fertilizer, so I don't think there's any restrictions on using them.
You had mentioned that you probably overuse on your own farm, or you produce more than you would need. Is there some dormancy to your end product, or do you sell that end product to other people, whether it's directly for their garden or to add to their compost system? I know there's like a network of vermicomposters that are swapping their extracts back and forth to make theirs better, stuff like that. Are you involved in that?
Yeah, we sell all of that at the farmer's market here in Rapid. So we'll have castings. I'll have an extract that I bring in a bottle. And what else?
Worms themselves.
Worms. I'll have worms in a bin ready to sell. So however you guys want to start, we'll have those products at the farmer's market.
Will you share where or what brand? Have you tried different brands of fish hydrolysate and humic acid and any of those products you have?
I would have to look up the brand I got. I ordered some off of Amazon. There's a company that makes all of them, and so far I just order them by the gallon. add a little bit of that to my mix every time. But any humic, and I think all of them are OMRI certified from this one company, and I don't remember off the top of my head who it is, but the company sells humic acid and fish hydrolysate and seaweed fertilizer, all three of them. So,
What's the reproductive cycle of worms? How often do they reproduce?
every worm will produce about a cocoon a week. So unlike other animals where you've got a male female and the female is the one that produces, worms are hermaphrodites, so every single worm will lay a cocoon every week.
And how long till that cocoon turns into a worm?
About 3 weeks.
So you got basically a month?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And every cocoon can contain between 1 and 4 worms. So they reproduce really fast. Yeah.
How deep are your 4x8?
They're about 30 inches, I think, something like that, 32 inches.
And how much are you feeding them a day then?
How
deep are the? I asked how deep they were, and he said about 30 inches.
Yeah.
But I asked then how much is he feeding them?
I feed them about once. I try to feed them once a week. I don't always keep up with that, but the 27-gallon totes that I have, I've got a neighbor that has horses, and she'll fill those with manure for me. And so once a week or so, maybe not quite that often, maybe every 2 weeks, I'll dump one of those totes in there, and they'll go through 27 gallons of horse manure in a couple of weeks.
And what causes the situation that the worms would leave the bin?
Could be too dry, could be too wet. If your bins are too wet and they go anaerobic, they'll smell. When worms will get out of that. Worms are attracted to moisture, so they'll go wherever they're most comfortable for moisture and temperature.
Do they leave it overcrowding?
No, not usually. It's usually either overfeeding or the bins are too wet or too dry. Is typically what I see with mine. If they're too crowded in there, they'll just stop reproducing. They'll still stay in the bin and feed. So, and it's hard to get them overcrowded. I haven't ran into that yet. I can pull back. I put plastic over the top of my bins to hold the moisture in, and I'll roll that plastic back, and it'll just be covered with worms. And I can still dig through there and pretty easily find cocoons in there, so I know they're reproducing still.
You don't have to have some sort of air exchange at all? Just all self-contained?
Yep.
Really?
Yep.
Saran wrap the top and...
Well, I just have loose plastic over the top of it. Yeah. And the bins are a woven nylon, I think they are. So some air gets in through those. And I don't go out and stir my bins up too much. If I add horse manure, I'll maybe take a pitchfork and stir them up a little bit and stir the manure in there, and then that helps to aerate it a little bit. I don't do that too often. Whenever I feed them, every couple weeks. But
So there's not a ratio of manure to straw or grass clippings or cardboard or anything to kind of...
no, I'll just throw some food in there and I keep an eye on it. And if I go back in a week and I still see manure on top, then they still got food. So I'll leave them alone for another week. And same with cardboard and stuff. If you see a bunch of it on top, then they're still processing it. So I maybe stir it in a little bit and add water if I need to. And
What's the ideal temperature and humidity?
I would say about room temperature, like 72, 75 is ideal for them. Like 70% probably in the bin. Like I said earlier, if you can grab some of your bedding and squeeze out a couple of drops from a handful, then that's about right.
Well, I think that about concludes our time here. We got a break coming up back in the other room. Lyle, will you be around in case somebody has some questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you guys got any more questions, just come find me, and glad to talk worms.
Thanks so much.
All right, thank you.